Good evening and welcome to our second lecture. This is Rawi Al-Farra. I'm going to be with you during this semester for democracy and human rights. As we discussed in the previous lecture, we're going to talk about the introduction level and democracy for at least the first 4 to 5 lectures. So please join me in the coming lecture to discuss more and more about what's going on in the theoretical level. Okay, let's remember together what are the core elements in chapter 1. We're going to discuss the core element of democracy, the characteristics, forms of democracy, basic aspects, elections, law, constitution, democracy, media, etc., etc. We already started to talk about definitions, core aspects or features. So join me today to talk more about democracy. As we started to talk about democracy and certain definitions, let's remember together that democracy is not merely a form of government. It is also a form of a state of social, cultural, economic structure as well. It is all about how people coexist together. It is closely associated with participation, competition, civil and political liberties. It is order of society. It is exactly how we do form communities, how these communities were built, and how it is organized in all aspects of life. Democracy is defined as a form of government in which the supreme power, as we said before, is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodic free election. But what I want you to remember all the time, it is not only about politics, it is all about life aspects. It's about how people live together, how they do express their feelings, their ideas, their thoughts, their dreams, how the relation is organized between the institutions, the governments, the economic structure. And we're going to see this in a very explicit way when we talk about, for example, communism or capitalism. We're going to see exactly how democracy and how politics and democratic state is connected to the economic system in a very clear and obvious way. Here, let's talk about more how certain thinkers take democracy in the context of the political track. Democracy refers to a political system in which government is formed by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representative. They do insist that the form or the basic form of the state must start by the willing of people. And from this common definition, we might agree upon certain points as following. Number one, the government must be elected by people. It is not chosen. It is something people are hiring for certain interests. Number two, there is a freedom of speech. Like even after we do select this government and hire this government, whatever the pattern of government or the shape of government or the form of the political regime, it must not stop people from express their ideas and feeling. There is no one party government in the country. It is not about one player. It is about diversity, as we mentioned before. Right to give vote to elect the representatives. What does this mean? In other words, people are hiring other people to run their business in a very simple way. A new point that we might agree upon is that the common people considered as the primary source of the power and the law. Like even when we talk about constitutions, laws, norms, etc., it must be derived from people interests, willing, and awareness. And this is one of the most important things we're going to discuss later. The last point here is that the principles of social equality and respect for the individual within a community is the core element in any community or structure that is seeking to be a democratic community. In other words, we can say that it defines as a government by the people in which the power is derived from the people themselves. Even if they do elect others to run the business, the relation between government and citizens must be very clear, accurate, and each party of this relation understand his or her role in a very clear, obvious way. In the coming parts, let's talk a little bit about some thinkers who try to explain democracy from their perspective and who tried actually to give the large landscape of democracy. Actually, Abraham Lincoln is one of the most important thinkers in political science, and he had a lot of contribution in politics. In the context of democracy, he said that democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. What does this mean? He just shortened the entire idea of democracy, saying that people do elect or select other people to run the interest of the entire community. The problem here, there is no clear-cut or universal definition of democracy. Even this very clear definition still very ambiguous in the part of implementation or to which level the authorities or power are separated. Most definitions actually focus on qualities, procedures, and institutions, and this is in itself a very critical dilemma in explaining democracy actually. Actually, the ambiguity of the explanation, even from the word itself, even if we agree that the word democracy means the rule by people or governing by people, it's still unclear. It's still undetermined. Democracy is a system where people can change the rules in a peaceful manner, and the government is given the right to rule because the people say it may. This statement actually one of the most interesting statement. Like, let's think more about the statement. Why do you think it's very important to talk about this here? I want you like to give a clear think about the statement that said it is all about the ability to change. Like whenever you have the feeling that this government is no longer doing their job, you are free to change them and to maybe replace them with other maybe governments or other representatives who can actually achieve this. But the only condition they give here is the peaceful track or the peaceful manner. I don't want you to worry a lot because we're going to discuss these things more and more later. I'm just giving you a surveying look about all the discussions about democracy. Another statement I want you to think about is that government by people, especially role of the majority. The idea of majority in itself is a little bit scary. Why it's scary? Because if we're gonna talk who are the majority and what is the percentage of majority will be very creepy, because if you're gonna say that majority equals, for example, 70% of people, it means that we're going to have 30% of people out of the track, and this is very dangerous actually. So the second statement also not clear, ambiguous, and maybe provoking us to think more and more about the definitions. A new statement I want to discuss with you is that a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free election. I want you to emphasize on the phrase that a system of representation, like who can represent who, and what is the criteria, and to which limit, etc., etc. All these explanations also very ambiguous. A new statement is that a political unit that has a democratic government is a modern democracy, but this is also very ambiguous. The term democracy comes from the Greek, as we said, the role of people, but who determine people? Do we consider people who are refugees are part of these communities? People who are refused, for example, like Amazigh in Morocco, can we consider them people or part of the people? So the definition of people itself is a little bit ambiguous. So even when we talk about the most agreed and the most common explicit features, we still not sure. All this will take us to another level of discussion. Let's see how others actually explain democracy. Let's see the track, the historical track, the thinkers, how previous thinkers even saw democracy. And definitions, or the historical definitions, is a tool to see. Don't you think so? Okay. Number one, McIver says that democracy as a form of a state is merely a mode of appointing, controlling, and dismissing a government. What do you think about this definition? Okay. Another definition by Gödel said that democracy is that form of government in which the masses of the population possesses the right to share in the exercise of sovereign power. It's again the idea of majority. It's the idea who determine who are the people. Press said that democracy really means nothing more or less than the role of the whole people expressing their sovereign will by their votes. But this is a little bit wide, and it could be when the communities used to form by hundreds, tens, or maybe thousands of people. But with the modern population and the very modern communities, what do you think? Do you think these definitions are valid anymore? Some thinkers were trying to explain and maybe to minimize the gap between the various different definitions, and they agreed that in spite of we have a wide range of landscape of democracy, at least these these differences and these various definitions give us, let's call them tools to build any coming community. Tool number one is to have a constitution. Tool number two is to have free elections. Tool number three is to build government by consent of the people. The other, or the fourth tool, will be the definition of majority. They agreed that we need to give a definition and a criteria to the idea of majority and the role of majority. Number five, or the fifth tool, would be to have a very clear explicit law. Number six is to have an agreed set of rights, freedoms, equality. Number 7, changing the government. And this is one of the most important elements of establishing democratic tools. A new tool, they said we need to have an open society. What does this word mean? An open for change, an open for improvement, an open for tolerance, acceptance, etc. They were talking about the equality as a tool, and they call it the political equality, the freedom to live or travel or to work or to educate or to practice any pattern of life that suits you and only suits you. They also were talking about the importance of protecting the public opinion. The idea of participation of people in decision-making process is one of the tools that they agreed to have to establish a democratic community. The last one is building opposition parties, and also, as we said before, it was not a mature idea in the context or in reference to the shape, the elements, the criteria, and maybe the norms to organize the establishment of these parties, and all the elements of their existence and coexistence and the relation between them and between the government itself. Actually, one of the most interesting questions that all thinkers were asking, do we really need democracy? Is that a must? Is that something we really need, or we really used to be a very maybe civilized communities, or to protect our mind, the kind or humankind? Um, a lot of thinkers also try to answer this question, say, number one, definitely we do need democracy to lead our communities toward development. Number two, element of decentralization will give a space to everyone inside the community to develop him or herself. To rise of political institutions, which means these communities definitely will achieve certain progress, either in political life or economic life. They were talking about, we do prefer democracy in context of spread of education, in context of having free media, sharing information, sharing data, allowing everyone to educate, learn, and practice. The last element is that they were asking for a clear separation between authorities to protect the idea of freedom and equality. And this is one of the maybe elements or tools that unfortunately we didn't see as realistic level till today. Okay. If you want to apply all these elements, tools, features, do you think it's easy? And if it's easy, why countries, governments didn't apply it till today? Let's talk about conditions which are very necessarily for successful working of democracy. Number one, or the first condition, is to have a system which can be termed as um, genuine and comprehensive democracy only when it fulfills both political and socio-economic aspects of people's participation and satisfaction. And I want you to notice that we are using the word satisfaction to the first time. It is not only about participation, it's also to be satisfied about their participation, as this participation must achieve or fulfill their interests and needs. So one condition is to achieve the participation and the satisfaction of people. The second condition is there may be two major categories: political conditions and social and economic conditions. The fulfillment of first leads to political democracy, and the second as social democracy. Actually, in modern literature of political science, there is a huge difference between the political democracy and social democracy. And there's a very controversial question saying, where do we should start? Should we start from building a very democratic social context, then establish a political democracy, or it's the opposite way? What do you think? Do we need to establish a political system first, then we're going to have a social democracy, or it would be the opposite way? We need to establish a social context of democracy and to have the social democracy, and a result of the social democracy, we're going to have a political democracy as well. What do you think? I think it's a question that demands from us more and more discussions, right? Okay. About political condition, it is essential that for a system to be democratic, we must adopt a constitution and laws that vest supreme power in people. Here they are talking about a new pattern of constitutions. Please make sure that uh, to consider that the existence of the constitution was linked to certain governments, powers, parties. Now they are talking about having these elements in a separate level, and a level that maybe even the government has no control over. Uh, this condition also is talking about that the human rights and the fundamental rights, such as equality, liberty of thoughts and experiences, beliefs, movement, communication, association, must be protected by the Constitution against the government itself. They even talked about the Constitution must have an international level, a universal level that makes all citizens in various countries equal. The democratic system has to have universal adult franchise as the basis of electing representatives at various levels of the government. Actually, they were trying to say that constitutions must be free, away of the control of the government, making the interest of people as the top of the priorities. There has to be a responsible government in which the executive is answerable to the legislative authority, the legislative to the people, and the judiciary to remain independent. Again, we are talking about separation among power, separation among authorities. Political institutions like political parties and interests and pressure groups, associations, various non-governmental organizations must be functional for expressing popular needs, demands, and opinions of people. They are not in a separate track. They are there to express people's needs, demands, and opinions. A democratic system is strengthened if it maintains an enlightened public opinion in its various forms through free press and other communication processes. In a way or another, media is one of the most important actors and players in politics, sorry, and in the political life, and in shaping the relation between government and people. So, to keep media free and away of the government control is one of the most important features of the democratic state, actually. In the previous slides, we were talking about the political conditions. What do you think if we're going to talk about social and economic conditions? Democratic system has to ensure that the social development is in tune with democratic values and norms, reflecting equality of social status and opportunities for development, social security, and social welfare. Citizens must avail opportunities of universal and compulsory education. They must also be enabled to utilize means of economic development. The fruits of economic development must reach all and especially to the poor and vulnerable, deprived sections of the community. Socio-economic development of the people strengthens the social democracy. What does this mean? In other words, it is very important to build from the bottom of the pyramid of the community. It is not enough to talk about elections, having separation between power, while we don't have equal and opportunities, while we don't have all people are having equal and justice opportunity to reach resources, while we don't have everyone can access the educational system, for example, or we don't have that everyone is capable to reach opportunities or to express his or herself. Okay, we reached the last point of our second lecture. Hoping you just start to understand issues about democracy and you already start to gather ideas about what we are talking about. Glad to join you in this journey. Please be safe and see you in the coming lecture. Bye.